Welcome to our class on Chassidus. We're going to be learning this week a beautiful Chassidic discourse in the Rebbe. The name of the Chassidic discourse is called Lech Lecha. The Rebbe said this Chassidic discourse on the night of Tuesday, Parshas Lech Lecha, which that year was the 7th day of the Marcheshvan, in the year Tafshin Memvav, 38 years ago. So again, the Chassidic discourse is based on the verse in this week's Torah portion where it says, Lech lecha me'artzecha. Lech means to go, lecha to you, but it's the same letters, lamed final chaf, lamed final chaf twice, from your land. So Rebbe said it's known, was brought down and explained in different Chassidic discourses, and at length in the classic Chassidic discourse in the Rebbe that Tzemach Tzedek, the third Chabad Rebbe, in his work called Eira Torah, and in Toiras Chaim of the Mittler Rebbe, and it's also mentioned in the Chassidic works of the Alter Rebbe, Torah of the Alter Rebbe. And they explain over there as follows. This that the Torah says Lech to go, and as it says Lech Lecha, double expression, so there's two insights. One is, like the Zohar says, that we're referring to a traveling going from high down to low. Another insight, which is also hinted in the Zohar, that the traveling is from below going on high. Lech lecha, high below, and then coming down from below on high. In other words, what does that mean? Because generally speaking, when there's a halicha, when someone is traveling, when someone is going, and even though in general, what does it mean you're traveling? You're not traveling in one spot. You're going from one level to the next level. There's standing and there's traveling. Traveling is moving forward. And up to the point when you're traveling, but you can't even compare where you started from. In other words, you don't just go from one place to the next place to be at the same level. The goal is to go to another level, a whole different level. But nevertheless, even when you travel, and you're traveling from one level to the next level, it's possible you can be going two ways. In other words, either you can be going from on high, you're going down low, or you're going from down low, you're going on high. And those are total two opposites. In both cases, you're traveling. Yes, in both cases, you're accomplishing. And in both cases, it's next level. But the question is, which way are you going? Are you going up or are you going down? Now, since the verse says, Lech lecha, and it doesn't spell out which way it's going, so therefore you must say that because it doesn't spell it out, it means both. And as it means both going from high down below, and below going on high. And you could say that this is the source of the insights of the different Chabad Rabbeim, that they say that Lech Lecha has two insights, because since it says Lech and doesn't say which way, so obviously what? It could be both ways. And it is both ways. And now I'm going to explain it more in detail. And he says like this. Later on in the Torah portion, he talks about two different types of travelings that Avraham Avinu did. One is where he traveled milmayla lamata. He went from on high down below, which is called in Hebrew, it's called a yerida, a downgrade. And then there's traveling from below on high, which is called an aliyah, an upgrade. Now, in the Torah, where it speaks about traveling from on high below, or below on high, it's two different verses. And therefore, because it's different verses, it's two different journeys. There's one journey going down from high below, and the other one's from below on high. In other words, first the Torah tells us how Abraham went down to live there. In other words, he went down to the lowest levels. What does that mean, to the lowest levels? He started out where? In the land of Israel, which we know Israel is the highest land physically and spiritually. And the contrary, more importantly, on a spiritual level. And because on a spiritual level Israel is so high, that's why physically it's so high. And he went down where? To the land of Egypt. To the depth of the earth, and it was not only the depth, but the lowest spiritual part of the earth, the lowest place. So that is referring to Abraham going from the highest place, Israel, on a physical level, on a spiritual level, down below to the land of Egypt on a physical and a spiritual low level. Afterwards, that's one set of verses. Afterwards, in different verses, it speaks like Abraham traveled. He went from the lowest place to the highest place. Like it says afterwards, Vayal Avram Mitzrayim. The verse says clearly, Vayal. He had an aliyah. He went up from Egypt. In other words, he went up from the lowest place of the earth of Egypt, and he went to the Eretz HaKodesh, to the Holy Land of Israel, which we said is higher than all the lands, physically and spiritually. And the verse also tells us that the elevation that he had after the downgrade. In other words, and because we know the whole purpose of going down is for an elevation. And like it says, when he left Egypt, what did it say? The Avraham and Abraham was covered ma'id. He was very, very heavy. But Mikna, he had a lot of cattle, a lot of kesef, a lot of silver, a lot of gold. In other words, it was a tremendous upgrade for Avraham Avinu, which he didn't have before. And like it says clearly in the verses, and especially with all the commentaries, etc. Now, so again, so you have two different parts of this week's Torah portion. One is referring to Abraham going down physically and spiritually from Israel to the land of Egypt, and then going up, elevating Egypt, and coming back to the land of Israel. But that's two different verses. So it's two different parts of the story. But the revolutionary idea in this opening verse, Lech Lecha, the first verse in the Torah, in this week's Torah portion, and which is basically the theme of the Torah portion, it means in Lech Lecha you have both journeys, from high down below, and below going on high. And as one journey has both components, and opposite components. Besides the fact we're talking about two different journeys, but literally in the same journey, either you're going from high down below, or you're going below on high, like we have the two stories of Abraham. Here we're saying in one journey you have both how So the question is, how does that happen? How do you have both in one? Shabbat is going to explain now. First, he's going to start off with the journey going milmaila lamata, going from high down below, of this verse where it says Lech Lecha. So Rabbi explains like this, and he says as follows: it's known that Avram Avinu, before his name was changed to Avraham, so it was Avram, which is made up of four letters, Aleph Vez, Reish Mem, which actually comes from two words. What are the two words? Av, which literally translates as father. In the world of Kabbalah, we know Av, father, is referring to Chachma. Ram, a very high level. Ram comes from very high, which means he was so, on an intellectual level, so high, so deep, it's beyond any human comprehension. In other words, Abraham's soul was a very high soul. Av Ram, his Chachma was very, very high. And like it says in the classical book of Sefer HaBoyer, that the attribute of Chesed told Hashem, the attribute of kindness told Hashem, from when Abraham was on the earth, I don't have to do my work anymore. Because Abraham is doing Chesed, kindness, off the charts. So you see that Abraham had a very, very high soul, both in Av Chachma, both in Chesed, and obviously his source of a soul is very, very high. The expression is Nela Mikol Rayin, it's off the charts. Like it's explained in Lens and Kabbalah and Chassidus, this high level. Now, from this high level that Abraham was, he didn't just stay there. He actually brought down his soul down into this world. And that's why it says, Lech Lecha, you to leave, Me'artzecha from your land, U'me'ladecha from the place you were born, U'beis from your father's house, to the land that I'm going to show you. And we know the famous Hasidic teaching on this verse. It says, one second. Let's look at the verse. What does it say? It starts off leaving your land, then your birthplace, and then your parents' home. So seemingly, it's just the opposite. First, you leave your parents' home, then you leave the place you were born, and then you leave the land. So why does the Torah use an opposite expression of what happened? And it's explained that when we say land is the physical land, but then there's a spiritual land. Artzachas are coming from the word of rotzon. It comes from the will. So first you have to leave your will. And Moiladadcha, the place you're born, is coming from is on a spiritual level, it's referring to the midos, the emotions. Why? Because the emotions come from the intellect. As we know that the intellect is the father and the mother, Av is Chachma and Aim is Bina, which give birth to the emotions. And from your father's home is referring to a lower level. Let's explain elsewhere. So there's all these different levels. Now, so again, so Artzecha is referring to your will, Moiladcha is referring to your emotions, and Beis Avicha is a lower level. Where are you going to? You're going to the land which is even lower. What is that referring to in the spheres? It's referring to Malchus. So in other words, you're journeying from the highest level, Rotzain, Midos, a lower level, into Malchus. In other words, you leave Rotzain, which is the highest level, on the way we have the way it exists in our world, which obviously is compared to the way it's on high. And as we know that Rotzain is the highest of all our powers that we have, and we know in the Sfirot, what's the highest sphere? Keter. In Keter you have Tainig and Rotzain. Rotzain is the highest power we have. And then you go down to the level of understanding, which is lower than will, and it means you understand the will. And then you go down even lower to the level of emotions, and then you come down to the lowest level. So that's the spiritual journey of why it says Artzecha Meladcha Mesavicha, because you start at Ratzain into the intellect, to the emotions, even lower into Malchus. Now the same thing applied to Avraham Avinu, that his soul went down from the highest levels. And it was where is Avraham Avinu's soul from? It comes from the Ratzain Elyon, the will of Hashem. And that level was revealed in his soul. And it came down to Meladcha, Ubeisavicha, which we said is the emotions, until it came down to Malchus, until the lowest levels. So Avraham Avinu went down from the highest levels down to the lowest levels. Now, just like it's by Avraham Avinu, which he was the first Jew, the same thing applies to each and every one of us. That when we came down to this world, we left from the highest levels, we came down to this low place. And that is when Hashem says, I'm going to take you to the land, I'm going to show you that specifically, when we went down this whole journey from the highest levels down into this level, into this world, Hashem says, I'm going to show you the power of the soul. I'm going to show you, I'm going to reveal that you have the power, that even though you're in a low place and you came down from the highest place, the soul has the power to overcome it all. Now, so the first Lech Lecha is referring to, again, the Lech is going down from the highest level, the way our souls are in Rotzain, through intellect, through emotions, to Malchus, but nevertheless we have the power to overcome it. The second insight in the verse is literally like the verse says, Avraham Avinu was on the lowest place. You know, he went out from Charan. He was going from Charan to the land of Israel, and we know Charan is referring to the lowest possible place. Like Rashi says that when it says Charan, with a final nun, it's referring to the wrath, Charan, the wrath of the world. So it's from the intensity of the materialistic, angry and physical world, and from here Abraham went from the lowest places until he went to the place that Hashem showed him. So that is on a physical level. But what does that have to do on a spiritual level? That Avraham Avinu avoided, what was Avinu's work? To take the charoin, take the physical wrath of the world, and to elevate it to the highest level. Now, and this applies to us in our spiritual service of Hashem. Why? Because first you have to leave your land. In other words, we're going from the lowest level to the highest level. You have to leave me'artzecha. So what is artzecha? What did we learn before? On the positive, it's the higher will. But then you have the will that we have, but we have these wills that are not appropriate. We have wills for things that we shouldn't be doing. So what do we have to do when you have it? You want to do something, so you want to do it strongly. So the first level is to, so to speak, force yourself. And like the Alter says, specifically in Tanya, where it says that all the revelations of what's going to happen when Mashiach comes is dependent on, and I'll say it in Hebrew, I'll translate it, Ma'aseinu, our actions, V'avodaseinu, in our work. In other words, every time we force ourselves to do the right thing, to go against the negative will, we are actually creating powerful energy, which we're going to get revealed when Mashiach comes. So first we have to do Ma'aseinu, our work. And like we know, it says in the Talmud that sometimes you force people to give charity. They don't want to give it. But why do you force them? Because sometimes we need to be forced to do the right thing. Now, so when we force ourselves, why do we force ourselves? Because the fact is we have sometimes our Yetzer Hara, our evil inclination that's very, very strong, which is rooted in the Charoin Af Shel Olam, in the physical wrath of the world, and up to the point the person says, I don't want to do the will of Hashem. So what happens when you don't want to do the will, you don't want, here's the key word, you don't want to do the will of Hashem, you have to force yourself and say, no, right, Sonny, I want to do the will of Hashem. So it's basically, the first level is a battle of the wills. The animal soul, the evil inclination, doesn't want to do the will of Hashem. And then you say, the first thing is, no, I do want to do the will of Hashem. And after you do the first level, you leave Lech Lecha Mi'atzcha, you leave the will. And once you leave that you basically are wanting to do the will of Hashem against the will of the animal soul, you have to go to the next level. You have to go out of your habits. In other words, things that you do habitually, a lot of things that we do like just by rote. And you're doing it because it's natural. Those things that you're doing from a natural perspective, but to do it more because you want to do it. So the first level is you have to want to do it. A, if you don't want to do it, you have to want to do it. And B, if you're doing it by rote, you should inspire yourself that you really want to do it. And afterwards, you go to the next level. And you have to leave the intellect and the emotions, that don't want to do things that you want to do, and then you want to do it. When the intellect doesn't want to do it, and the emotions don't want to do it, then you go ahead and do it. And then you reach the place, the land that Hashem is going to show you, the true land. What is our true will? And like it says, why is it called? Why is Eretz Yisrael called Eretz Yisrael? Because it comes from the word Shirotza, does want to do the will of Hashem. Not only that. But that you want to do the will of Hashem, but Eretz comes from the word of Ritza, which means you're running to do it. So not only do you want to do it, you force yourself to do it, but you do it with alacrity, you do it right away. Now, these two components, the will to do what Hashem wants, and to do it quickly and with joy and happiness, we find these two components by Avraham Avinu. Why? Because we see that Avraham Avinu did things very, very quickly. As it says clearly in the Torah, by Yashkem Avram Baboiker, Avram got up early in the morning, and he harnessed his donkey to do the mitzvah of Hashem, which means he was able to break all the browns, anything that was holding him back from doing it. I'll do it later. No, he's doing it right now. Because the fact is that it's not appropriate to Avraham Avinu himself to go ahead and harness his donkey. But nevertheless, if he has to go mitzvah for Hashem, he does it. And the same thing also, to do it in a complete way, we find by Avraham Avinu. Like the Rambam writes clearly in the laws of Tshuva, in the 10th chapter, that the spiritual work of every single Jew has to be done in the way of what? Love. You have to love Hashem. And that is what we learned from Avraham Avinu. That Hashem called him that he's my lover. And he served Hashem from love. Like it says in the prophets, Avram Oyavi. So Avraham Avinu, what he did was, he took where the Yetzer Hara didn't want it, he did it. But not only did he do it, but he did it with quickly, and he did it with joy and with love. Now this Avraham Avinu did. But guess what? Once Avraham Avinu did it, that became our inheritance. It became part of our DNA. In other words, even though sometimes we do things not necessarily for the right reasons, and as we do it because we want a reward for doing the mitzvahs, and we want to have the world to come, which is okay. But that's the way to start. But ultimately, the goal is to be like Avraham Avinu. We're serving Hashem not because of the rewards, not because of the world to come. We're serving Hashem because we love Hashem. Our goal is that we should want to have a relationship because we love Hashem. And that's that's the meaning of that we're going to the land that Hashem is going to show us. And as we go from one level to the next level, up to the point that we first were starting out, we're fighting our will. And then we're going ahead and trying to go against our intellect and emotions that don't want us to do it. But the ultimate goal is to go to the land that Hashem is going to show us, which means we're going to do things from a place of love. Now, we explained before that these two insights of Lech Lecha, which means going from transforming the world and bringing down godliness in the world, is in the same verse, the same two words, Lech Lecha. In other words, so obviously it's not a contradiction. Even though it's opposites. One is basically we're drawing down godliness into the world. The other ones we're fighting and transforming the world. It's not, even though it is opposites, but it's not a contradiction. Why? Because it's in one verse. And according to the explanation, the way it's explained in Torah Sheba'al Peh, and as we know, the Torah was given with all the commentaries, so obviously it has a connection and becomes part of the life of Torah, which helps us in leading our life that we live it. So how do we do it? We have two different opposites, and the Rebbe explains like this, and he says as follows. Because what happens is when something says so in the Torah, even if it's opposites, it becomes one. So you can have right, left, but when Torah puts it together, right and left become one. Milmayla lamata is one avodah. Bringing down godliness is one type of serving Hashem. Milmata lamata is another way of serving Hashem. When the Torah puts it in one verse, it becomes one. And then we give an example. Like we see where it says when God gave the Torah, so in the Ten Commandments it says, Anoichi Hashem Elokecha, I am God, your God. And then it says you shouldn't have any other gods. And it says those two commandments were said in one utterance. Now, the commandment of Anoichi, of the Ten Commandments, what is that including? All the positive commandments. As we know that Anoichi is a positive commandment. The commandment of Lo Yih Lecha, you shouldn't have any other gods, includes all the negative commandments. But nevertheless, even though the two opposites, they were said as one. And and that's why it says in Chazal that God gave us 613 commandments. How do we know He gave us 613 commandments? Because it says, Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu instructed us with the Torah. Now, Torah was spelled out Saf, Vav, Reish, Hey. The numerical value is how much? 611. We're lacking 2. We need 2 more. So Anoichi, Torah is a 611. Anoichi is the positive commandment, and Lo Yih Lecha is a negative. And those 2 we heard from Hashem. So Anoichi and Lo Yih Lecha, the 2 commandments we heard directly from God. And the other 611, Moshe Rabbeinu Torah. That's why we have 613. So you see clearly that from the Torah perspective, the 611, Moshe Rabbeinu taught us. Then we have 2 more, Anoichi and Lo Yih Lecha. So the Torah specifically divides it. It's 2 different commandments. Because you need to have 613 because there are 248 positive commandments, 365 negative, and we know you can't add or take off. But nevertheless, even though it's 2 separate commandments, it was said in one. And like the Rambam writes, that clearly the first mitzvah is to know God, and based on the commandment of Anoichi Hashem Elokecha, and the first negative precept is not to have any other gods. But so even though it's 2 separate mitzvahs, it's listed as 2 separate mitzvahs, but what does it say in Chazal? That Anoichi and Lo Yih Lecha Hashem says together. Because when something is in the Torah, 2 opposites can become one. So the same thing also applies when the 2 types of journeys. And there's a journey from going down, bringing godliness down into this world and elevating the world, which is similar to the positive commandments and the negative commandments. Because what's the negative commandments? Going away from evil, like staying away from anything negative, which basically means milmata l'mayla, transforming the world. On the other hand, the positive commandments is doing good, which is basically bringing down godliness into the world. So the fact that Torah puts it in one verse, you can have 2 opposites in one thing. And that's the power of Torah. Torah can take 2 opposites and unite them. And the same thing also applies to every person's spiritual service in this world. As we know that we are one nation in the world. Like the Alter Rebbe explains, that it says, Yisrael Goy Echad B'Aretz, we're one nation in the world. What does that mean? So Alter Rebbe explains beautifully. He says, what does it mean we're Echad? That we draw in Echad, Achdus, oneness, even into the materialistic world. When you see a physical, you don't see godliness, but our job is to bring godliness in there. In other words, not only don't we get affected from the physical world, on the contrary, we bring in unity of Hashem into the materialistic physical world. In this world, where it's solo. And therefore, what's our avodah? Our avodah is to unify not only the physical world, but to unify the avodah of milmayla lamata and milmata lamayla. And Rebbe says he'd like to connect this with the idea of the 7th day of Cheshvan, Marcheshvan. What's the 7th day of Marcheshvan? That's the day the Jewish people finished the journey of going to Israel for the festival, and now it starts the process of after the festival. So it goes up until Zayim Cheshvan is part of our journey to and from Jerusalem, and afterwards we went back home. In other words, so that's the day that connects the 2. What does that mean? It knows that when we went up to Eretz Yisrael, when we did Aliyah L'Regel, we went to Jerusalem, we went to the temple. What is that? We went to see godliness revealed. Like it says clearly in the Torah, Yeirah kol schurcha, everyone is going to see godliness. And like it says, just like you came to see, you're going to be seen. And came to be seen, you are seen. In other words, that the vision and the will of every single person was the will of Hashem. It wasn't just a physical thing. Yerah means that the will, our seeing is the will of Hashem. And just like it's by Hashem, the same thing applies to us. Now, so that is the time of Aliyah Regel before the Zayin Cheshvan. What happens after Zayin Cheshvan, when we finish Aliyah Regel? It's just the opposite. In other words, it's not anymore the time of we went into Israel, and then what's our job to deal with the physical world, the darkness of the world. So it's two different worlds. Before, it's vision, closeness to God, the will of Hashem is real, or very, very clear. And afterwards, we're dealing with struggles and challenges after Zayin Cheshvan. Now that's in time. The same thing applies to space as well. Because where were we when we went up to Israel, or in the Regel, we went to Jerusalem. Afterwards, we were outside Jerusalem. What's the difference between Jerusalem, the Beis HaMikdash, and the whole world? In Jerusalem and the Beis HaMikdash, we know it's literally a place of holiness. And compared to Jerusalem and the temple, the whole world is weekday. It's not holy. And not only in the Holy of Holies and in the temple, but the whole Jerusalem is a holy place. And as we know, one of the reasons that Jerusalem was not divided amongst the tribe, because Jerusalem is a place dedicated for the Bet HaMikdash, and the Bet HaMikdash is a public place where you bring public sacrifices. And matter of fact, the main service of the Beis HaMikdash is by bringing the sacrifices every single day, which is a community sacrifice. And since Jerusalem is a place of the Beis HaMikdash, it wasn't divided amongst the tribes. And that's on a physical level. And the same thing on a spiritual level. Just like the Beis HaMikdash, what was its impact? What was the net result? The Beis HaMikdash accomplished unity amongst all the Jewish people. And therefore it accomplished it also in Jerusalem. Because Jerusalem comes from, it says in the verse, Yerushalayim ki'ir shechubra layachtav, it unifies everything. It unifies the city, it unifies the Jewish people, that we should be a vessel for Migdash Hashem, Koine Decha, Hashem's hands are dwelling there. Which is basically a Machain L'Shivtcha, it's a place where Hashem can dwell. So in other words, Jerusalem, on space-wise, Jerusalem and the Beis HaMikdash is one thing. All holy. However, outside Jerusalem is weekday compared to Jerusalem. So now we'll understand why the day of the 7th of Cheshvan, which is the day which is the dividing line between going up to Aliyah L'Regel, going up to Jerusalem, and the time after going up to Jerusalem, and between the Jerusalem and the holy place, the Beis HaMikdash, and the whole world, because the 7th of Cheshvan's purpose is to connect the two, of before going up to Israel and leaving, and Jerusalem and the whole world. And we'll finish off, and he says like this: it should be the will of Hashem that these ideas should be fulfilled in a real, tangible way, in our actions, in our work, to bring in unity of Hashem into this physical world. And since every one of us, our souls come from the three patriarchs. The first one we know is Avram Avinu, and we know Echad Avram, he was one. And the same thing also from Sarah Imenu. Every one of us are called, we are connected to Avram, Yitzchok, Yaakov, and Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. And we know that Avram and Sarah were the first ones, and it's underscored specifically in reference to all the converts that Abraham converted, and Sarah converted all the converts as well. And like it's brought down in the different midrashim in the Torah and Chazal and Kabbalah and Chassidus. So what should happen is it should be fulfilled for every one of us. Lech lecha. We should go, milmayla lamata, bring down the godliness into the world and transform the world. And we should go to the land that God is going to show us. Just like by Avram Avinu, that every one of the Jewish people, including everybody together, we should go literally in 1 second, in one moment, to the land that God is going to show us, into Eretz HaKodesh, and we should go mitoich simcha v'tuv leva, with happiness and with gladness of heart. So here we have another beautiful, powerful Chassidic discourse about Parshas Lech Lecha, bringing godliness in the world, elevating the world, and we can obviously do both because the Torah gives us the power, as it's written in there, and ultimately the Rebbe says we'll all merit where the world will be transformed and we'll have Mashiach, and God willing, our next class will be in Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh. Have a great and blessed blessed week. Shavua Tov.